in Paul's letter to the Galatians, the first chapter. I'm going to read 2 verses. Paul is talking about what he was and what he is. You have heard, no doubt, of my earlier life in Judaism. I was violently persecuting the church of God and was trying to destroy it. But when God, who had set me apart before I was born and called me through his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son to me, so that I might proclaim him among the Gentiles. I don't know if you remember when the first Apollo was launched. That rocket went into space and then started sending back those beautiful pictures of the Earth. That beautiful blue ball with white clouds floating in space. Our home. And as we looked at that for the first time from that viewpoint, your hearts were moved and you felt the power of something much bigger than we are. And yet there was a group in this country called the Flat Earth Society. And the Flat Earth Society said all those pictures are fraudulent. That's a bunch of hooey. That's not true. They're fooling you. The earth is flat. It always has been flat. It always will be flat. And do you know there are about 1,500 of those in that organization in the country? Every year they get about 3,000 letters from people encouraging them about their work in the Flat Earth Society. Well, I guess what we think is, do some people never change? Don't we ever learn better about things? Columbus thought the earth was flat, but we know now that it's not. We've seen it from another perspective. And that brings the whole question to us. Can we change? Can people really change? Do we really change? Well, the church has always said, we of all people in the world believe that people can change. That people do change. I suppose you probably saw in the paper recently where Beaumont and Port Arthur have the highest rates of communicable diseases in the state of Texas and one of the highest in the United States. Do you know what that says to us also? That the possibility of HIV and AIDS is higher in those 2 cities that are our neighbors here than anywhere else in Texas and anywhere else in the United States. That quickly says to us, we must change. We must change our way of life. It is a matter of life and a matter of death for all of us. Paul wrote those letters to the Galatian church and said, folks, do you know what I used to be? Look at what I was. I was a first-class bum. I was out to kill people. I was out to put people in jail, all for the sake of religion, which made it even worse. He said, I did it in the name of religion. Look what I was, but look what I have managed to become. Because once I got a glimpse of God, once I understood Jesus and saw his life, I felt like God had called me before I was born to do this. And now I have managed to change. A long time ago in England, they used to cut off people's hands who picked pockets. And they started by cutting off their right hand. Then they cut off their left. They kept picking pockets. Well, there was an old pickpocket that kept getting caught, and they cut off his right hand, they cut off his left hand, and then he picked pockets with his teeth. Some people just don't change, you say, But I tell you, I never said, or nobody ever said, it's easy to change. Once your life is set in a certain pattern or patterns, it's not easy to change those patterns. It's not easy to get in the habit of going to church. That's tough. It is hard to change habits. Nobody ever said it was easy. I am not suggesting to you that it's easy to change. I am just simply saying to you we can change. And sometimes we have to change for ourselves and for people that we love. You know, it's hard, but you can do it. There's a missionary that told about an old African whose name altered after he was converted. He called himself After. Everything to him was after his conversion. Everything changed. He was totally different after. So, he said, call me After. Everything goes back to my knowledge of God and my knowledge of Jesus in the world, kind of person he was, how he lived, what he called us to become. There's a great story in the Bible about Jesus and his disciples who ran upon a blind man one day. And the disciples said, Jesus, what happened here? Who sinned? Because this man is blind. Did his mama sin or his daddy sin? He was born blind. And Jesus didn't even try to deal with that question because people then thought if you got sick or if something was wrong with you, then somebody had to have committed a sin. I was so glad to hear the pastor of the First Baptist Church in Oklahoma City say on TV this morning in an interview before the church services there, we must not try to explain to anybody why this happened. We cannot explain why it happened. We must not say to people in the shallowness of their faith, we will tell you why this happened and what was going on. He said, we cannot. Don't even try it. He said, all we can do is say God is there. Reach out and get hold of him and claim his presence and his power in your life. That's the best we can do. So Jesus said to those disciples, nobody sinned. That's not what happened, but he said, I'll show you the power of God at work. And he had the man stand up, and he did something he never did before and he never did afterwards. He spit in the dust, and he picked it up and made a little paste of spit and dirt. And he put it on that guy's eyes. And then he said, now you go wash your face in the pool over here. And the man went and washed his face, and he washed that mud off his eyes, and he came back, and he was seeing. And everybody said, well, that's not possible. You can't change that kind of thing. That doesn't happen. This must not even be the same guy. He must have a twin brother. Can't be. And then they said, let's take him to the Pharisees. And they took him to the Pharisees, and they said, didn't we see this man sitting on the curb begging? And he's been blind all his life, and now he could see. What will happen to him? That can't happen. That kind of change doesn't take place. And they kept saying to the man, what happened to you? And he kept telling them, well, this man came, and he spat in the dirt, and he rubbed it on my eyes, and I washed it off, and I could, who was he? He said, I don't even know who he was. But he did it. That much I know, and I was blind, and now I see. I guess he was a prophet. And they said, let's call his parents. So they got the man's parents in and said, this your son? And they said, yes, it's our son. Well, what happened to him? They said, well, we don't know. And they didn't dare say anything about Jesus because the law was if you professed him, you got thrown out of the church. And they said, we don't know what happened. He's our son. We'll tell you that. But if you want to know what happened, ask him. He's of age. They didn't want to get in it. All we know is he was blind, now you see. So they kept picking on this guy. And he kept telling them, why would I tell you again? You won't listen to what I tell you. Well, isn't that a message for the church today? Why would I keep telling you? Nobody listens to what we say. But they kept on until finally he just kept saying it over and over again. They finally threw him out. Just couldn't believe that those kind of changes could take place. And Jesus saw him in the street and said, fellow, what happened to you? And he told him, he said, would you like to follow me? He said, but I don't know who you are. And he told him who he was. And the man then followed him. They couldn't accept that changes could occur, that things could happen in people's lives that changed them. There was a preacher that went back to his hometown one time to preach. He had grown up in this little town, graduated from high school there, and he went back to preach. Held a revival, and he said at the first service there's a lady sitting out there that just kept staring at him. She stared and she stared. And after church, she came up and she said, I went to high school with you. You can't tell me you're Charlie's son. You're not the kid that grew up here in high school with us. You're not the one that got in all the fights at the football games every year. You can't be the guy that I knew who stayed in trouble all the time that he was here. And he said, I am, but I'm not. Yes, I'm him, but no, I'm not him. I've changed, I'm not the same person that I was. I made some changes in my life. Augustine was walking down the street one day after his conversion. His former mistress was on the sidewalk. And as he went by, she said, Augustine, it's I. And he just kept on walking. So she trotted along behind him, and she kept saying, Augustine, it's I. And he finally stopped and said, but it is not I. He was not the same person anymore. Everybody looks for a finished product among Christians. Everybody comes and says,